In 1991, Sega released a peripheral for the Genesis called the Sega CD, also known as the Mega CD outside of the US. It is considered a console within its own right, since the processing power of the original system was boosted and games could be played on CD, which allowed for games to be nearly 320 times larger than the Genesis cartridges.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for, Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show it!
A total of 205 games were made for it, including Mickey Mania and Batman Returns. There was also Desert Bus, where players do nothing but drive a bus on a desert road for miles on end. It is widely considered to be the most boring game of all time. The Sega CD performed poorly compared to its parent console. Only 2.2 million Sega CDs were sold. Fun fact, in 1993, the United States Congress began to hold hearings on video game violence marketed towards children. Sega was known for its violent games, including Sega CD's Night Trap, a terrible horror game. This scene sparked a lot of controversy, as it was seen as too violent. Surprisingly, it isn't that graphic at all. This even led to the creation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB, which gives age and content ratings to video games. The controversy got Sega a lot of publicity and only reinforced the edgy attitude of the company. But that edginess wasn't seen on the Sega Pico, released in 1994. It was designed as an educational and entertaining system for children aged between 2 and 8 years old. Children could play games like Tails and the Music Maker and Sonic the Hedgehog's Game World. In 2005, Sega launched an updated version of the Pico called the Advanced Pico Bina, which also worked as a handheld. The Pico was a hit in Japan but failed to catch on elsewhere. Still, Sega reported sales of 3.8 million Pico consoles, so it still did better than the Sega CD. In a last-ditch attempt to prolong the life of the Genesis even further, Sega released another peripheral in 1994, the 32X. Sega of America and Sega of Japan had their differences if the 32X should have been a peripheral or a new console. These two would continue to clash over many disagreements. The 32X added support for 32-bit games as opposed to just 16-bit games, and was therefore capable of playing ROM cartridges that were different to the Genesis itself. Titles that players could enjoy on the 32X were Doom, Mortal Kombat 2, Virtua Fighter, and Knuckles Chaotix, a Sonic game that features Knuckles as the main character. Only 800,000 units were sold, and the 32X is considered a commercial failure. The successor to the Sega Genesis is the Sega Saturn, released in 1994 in Japan and a few months later with a different design in North America. However, they shot themselves in the foot when launching the console in America, as they made a surprise announcement during E3 that the Saturn would be available that same day. While Sega thought this would be a major win and a positive surprise for everyone, they didn't count on annoying all the retailers who hadn't been told and weren't prepared for the rush. Walmart and Best Buy even refused to stock the system and its games at all due to the poor communication. To make matters worse, Sega's price of $399 was seen as a good value by their own staff until Sony announced that their new console, the original PlayStation, would be $299. Oh, and the Saturn was up against the Nintendo 64 that year too. Meanwhile, due to long-standing disagreements between Sega of Japan and Sega of America, Tom Kalinske, the CEO of Sega of America, left the company. Sega's marketing team did little to help either, freaking out their audience with more weird adverts that didn't really showcase the system's abilities.
He will lead you. Watch.
While some franchise classics like Virtua Fighter did make it onto the Saturn, there never came a Sonic 4, which wasn't a smart move by Sega. Instead, players received Sonic R, Sonic Jam, and Sonic 3D Blast. It was no surprise that Saturn turned out to be another failure for Sega, only selling 9.3 million units compared to sales of 32.9 million Nintendo 64s and 102.4 million PlayStations. Sega's final attempt at a serious gaming console came in 1998 with the Dreamcast. The controller featured a VMU, which is a memory card with a screen. Some games used it to show additional data, like inventory or maps. The Dreamcast was considered to be ahead of its time and was initially successful. The launch titles were decent as well. There was Sonic Adventure, Mortal Kombat Gold,
Round 2. Fight!
Soul Calibur. Plus, later there came more great games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Sonic Adventure 2, and many others. Even the price at launch of $199 seemed reasonable. However, the gaming gods were once again not on Sega's side. Despite some early success, the Dreamcast failed to gain enough momentum before the wildly popular PlayStation 2 came out in 2000, followed by the Xbox in 2001. Sega only sold 9.1 million units compared to sales of 24 million for the original Xbox, and a whopping 155 million units were sold of the PlayStation 2. Sega discontinued the Sega Dreamcast in 2001, just 18 months after its release in North America. With yet another failure, Sega lost a massive amount of money. In the last year of the Dreamcast alone, Sega lost $200 million. No wonder they decided to stop making video game consoles. Instead, they became a third-party developer. And surprisingly, ever since, they've been working with companies like Nintendo rather than trying to compete against them. Who would have thought? How many of Sega's consoles did you own? Which was your favorite? Let us know in the comments. Suggestion that keeps popping up. Well, in fact, it is by far the most requested